It's like versus like the world I live in today. It's like, hey, listen, I'm giving you pipeline. It's there, it's working, it's converting, and that feels great. Like it feels like a very nice exchange of you trust me, you give me a resource, I give you something back, and we're good.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's session, Grow Pipeline Without Growing Your Tech Stack. I'm Nick Bennett. I'll be your host today. And so if you think about today's world, marketing teams are under more pressure than ever. Budgets are tighter, expectations are higher, and things are changing fast. A lot of teams are using more tools than ever, but they're still falling short on execution. And I have plenty of thoughts on that. I know our speakers have plenty of thoughts on that, but a little bit of housekeeping for everyone that's listening to this. We're going to be covering really three things throughout the session today. We're going to unpack what an efficient outcome-focused go-to-market stack really looks like, how to run multi-channel campaigns without adding more tools, and why tech plus services might be the future for lean marketing teams. And most importantly, we want to bring it back to what's real. Teams today are being asked to do more with less. I don't have to tell anyone that's listening to this that's we're all living that today. We hope that this session is going to give you clarity, direction, and a few tactical ideas to take back to your work that you can implement the next day. So with that, I'm joined by three amazing guests. I'm going to let them each introduce themselves. And Jane, let's start with you.
You got it. Thanks. Happy to be here with you all today. I'm Jane Serra. I'm the VP of Growth Marketing at Daxtra. And Nick nailed it with what's keeping you up at night. He asked us to answer on our intros. And it's still, years later now, the doing more with less piece, always. And it's always in a different way. It used to be smaller teams. Now it's shrinking the tech stack. So this is a very timely topic for us today.
Amazing. Thanks, Jane. Brian, over to you.
Thanks, Nick. Nice to be here. Very good to be the token English person on the call as well. So happy to represent across the pond. I'm Managing Director of a B2B marketing agency called Miramar. We are based about 50 miles outside of London, and we're a full service B2B agency. In terms of what keeps me up at night, I think it's probably the uncertainty. Certainly coming from the agency side of the world, budgets have been under a lot of pressure, certainly for the last 18 months or so. So it feels like the market is kind of moving in the right direction. Things are feeling like they're getting a little bit more positive, but everything can change on a day-by-day basis. So uncertainty is the thing that keeps me up at night.
Love that. Thank you, Brian. And Derek, let's have you introduce yourself as well.
Yeah, happy to. Good morning, good evening, whenever you're listening to this. Derek Schoettle, CEO of DemandScience. Happy to be here. So DemandScience, just quickly, we provide, end-to-end performance marketing services for the enterprise, basically branded demand in simple terms, but I'm sure we'll talk more about that. Spent the last 25 plus years of my career mostly in enterprise software, SaaS, and have now in the last 2 years just increased my conviction about the benefits of working in and flexing with our customers. So whether you're in marketing or whether you're in an agency, kind of filling the gaps. Because the thing that keeps me up at night, aside from my 4 kids and their various stages of development and all the other things that go with that.
So true.
So to put it in context, the work thing kind of keeps me up at night. Family stuff, more often not keeps me up at night. But I think the part that really keeps me up at night, having lived through, without giving an age, the phenomenon of the internet, and then kind of consolidated computing, and then the cloud, and then mobile, and then big data, all of those had constraints of people and infrastructure. You had to have skills, you had to have the right network, the storage, the memory, the capacity to do the things you wanted to do. We're now entering into an age where there's very little constraint. Things can move very quickly. So the work that we do day to day supporting our clients, the tactics we're using, the investments we're making, I'd like to think that we're making the best ones, but things are changing so quickly. Like, I just am always anxious about that. Like, are we doing what's best? Are we doing all that we can to get to the outcomes we want? Because things are changing so fast.
Love that. Fantastic intro from all of you. I'm excited. I can't wait to learn from every single one of you. I can't wait to share my own thoughts as well. And so, let's get into it. So kind of setting the stage of the problem. And Derek, you talked just a little bit about it, but I think we should dive a little bit deeper is Why do you think so many marketing teams today are overwhelmed by their tech stacks? What's driving that problem at the end of the day?
Yeah, so I think it's a combination of things, but first and foremost, the data. I think the consequence of a lot of, I'll say the last 15 years, and we're coming out of a bull market where budgets were plentiful and there was little, I'd say, oversight or interaction between, I'll say, back office and front office. So you have this accumulation of tools, you have an accumulation of signals that are difficult at the core to integrate and normalize. And then I think more practically, just interpret and find signal. I think there is now more so than ever with, the advent of all these LLMs, where you used to get information. It was like, oh, I'd get a white paper. It's from an author I trust. And then I'm going to call my friend Jane, or I'm going to call Brian and say, hey, is this right? And then I'm going to make a decision. And now it's like, a never ending, set of signals you're trying to get on how to make a decision. And it's related to that, in this day and age where when you buy technology, making it work, finding great people, training them, keeping them also, like, I think, again, different generation, but, I think the generation coming up is much more comfortable with different types of careers. Yeah. Yeah, exactly, Jane. So I think it starts with data. Then I think it goes very quickly to like the team construct or construction. And then lastly, the part, and this is, genuinely where we spend a lot of our time is, how do you ensure that, the right kind of construct, which I know is not sexy per se, but the commercial construct is like, if you're signing an agreement for 2-3 years, 20 years ago, that was fine. Today, I think it's a risk. So it's a combination of those things that I start with the data, end with the data.
Love that. Now, Brian, when you think about this from your experience, what's the biggest downside to having too many tools in your stack?
I think knowing how to use them, because these tools aren't necessarily that easy to use, are they? They're, if you dived into Salesforce, if you dived into Pardot, if you dived into Sixth Sense, each one of these things has a different kind of user interface. You kind of have to understand how the tools are put together, what each tool is designed to do, and what part of the process is there to solve. And each one of those things is complicated. And I think often we just assume that, a large organization would invest, £100,000 in license fees, and suddenly it's like, go ahead, marketing team, fill your boots. Everything's going to be easy from now on in. But that's not the case. These things are not easy to use, and there's an element of specialism that's required. But also, there are very few, if any, marketers out there that are experts across data, that are experts across creativity, strategy, copywriting, all the things that power these tools to be as efficient as they can be. We're trying to put those into the hands of a handful, one or two individuals within a marketing team. And how is it feasible for those individuals to be that skilled that they can get the most out of these tools without support? And I think that's my view, is that a lot of it is we're probably putting too many unrealistic expectations on too few people, and that's why tech stacks feel a little bit bloated and a little bit unwieldy from my experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jane. Sorry.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think we often forget about training and allocating time for that. We think, oh, okay, we have this problem. Hopefully you start with the problem and not the tool, but you have a problem, you solve it with the tool, and then you think it'll magically go away and like everything's fixed by bringing the tool in. But you need time to onboard whoever's owning it. You need to identify the owner or set of owners who are running this. And you need time for training and a plan to launch into things after the training. Because the other way I've seen things fail is you train and then you go into another project, you get sidetracked and you come back in, you have to retrain. There's a whole time factor that we don't factor into the onboarding process.
Well, and this is, I think also I have a ton of sympathy for marketing leadership in the fact that you don't really have time, regardless, even if you've picked the right tool and you've done the training, you got the right team. Again, it's been, as I've spent more and more time in the last year and a half at DemandScience talking with our CMO partners and customers, because you'd think, oh, well, I'm going to set an annual budget. I'm going to have, a set of clear directives and goals, and I'm going to manage to it. And the reality is it's almost the exact opposite. It's like, nope, it's quarter to quarter, it's month to month. I've got people coming and going. I've got in-person events. I've got to manage signals coming from the market. I've got to manage social. Like the cacophony of things is now, it is remarkable, honestly, that we even find the time to do all that we try and do today with all the tools, let alone if you have only a few. It's tricky and because it's changing so much.
Yep.
And how often, so speaking of signals, sorry, this brought up another specific instance where on my team or in previous companies, I go to set something up with signals, right? And set it up to connect to Slack. But I hit a technical roadblock that just, I don't have access to something. And then all of a sudden it pauses and I can't focus on this until someone else is back in the office.
Yeah.
So the whole thing gets either delayed or pushed back or forgotten altogether. There's just all these little hiccups along the way in setup.
Totally agree.
100%. And you bring up a good point. It's like goes back to the whole start of like doing more with less. It's like, a lot of these marketing teams were being decimated unfortunately by layoffs. And it's just like you're still, the training piece is so important because it's like you're being thrown all this technology. Go do this, and you're pulled in a million different directions. But when you're one person, ultimately that's just going to lead to burnout, which actually brings me to my next question for you, Jane. It's like when we were doing the prep, you've mentioned that you worked in organizations where campaign budgets, tech budgets, and headcount were all managed separately. Now, I'm curious, how has that impacted your ability to move quickly or shift strategy when needed? Because, it could be a little bit challenging.
Yeah, I definitely love the aspects of smaller startups where it's much more of a fluid budget, and if you need to hire somebody versus bring in a tech platform, you have the option, the freedom really to allocate budget wherever is the biggest pain for your team at the moment. But when it's isolated and you have X dollars for a product, for a platform, X dollars for people, X dollars for campaign, it's a lot. It's siloed, right? That's the thing we talk about all the time is breaking down silos in marketing. We need to do the same for budgets and have it be fluid and a team discussion. Like, where do we need to allocate this? Because sometimes you just don't need more tech stack, especially nowadays where everybody seems to be consolidating their tech stack, which as a SaaS provider is painful on our side as well. So to sell tech in a market where everyone's consolidating is tough. But as the marketer consolidating our tech stack, I get it as well. We need to scale back. So if you have the budget there and you are already consolidating your tech stack, it makes sense to be able to move that over into people, or especially in this do more with less time. I'm hungry for more people on my team always.
Yeah, well, I think from the agency perspective, what we're seeing is that there's a growing demand for fractional skills, because hiring an FTE to do demand based is expensive, and actually you might not have enough things for that individual to keep them really fully utilized for the whole week. So actually we can buy those skills for half a day a week, and we don't have to manage those individuals. We don't have to add the headcount. That works. And I think I've certainly seen it over the last kind of 12 to 18 months from an agency perspective, that there seems to be more of a culture of bringing in agency support on a fractional basis, versus before then, a lot of in-housing of marketing teams was happening, and there was a reluctance to pass work to agencies. So I think it's cyclical, and we're starting to see the need for more flexible, more fractional workforces. And obviously there's a lot of freelancers out there that can fulfill those roles internally, but agencies are benefiting from that as well.
It also feels like outcomes. I mean, I think because I have a chance to work with a couple of other companies that are of different scale, and top down, the pressure is always, okay, you're putting money in, what are you getting out? And I think there was this kind of perception that, and it started years ago, with the first bits of storage. You used to buy a bit of EMC storage. I'm totally dating myself. I got to get out of this habit. But the issue was you'd spend, $1 million on an EMC Centera that was empty. It was empty. But at least I could point to it in the corner of the data center and be like, okay, I'm getting something. And try selling a database that's also empty for $1 million piece of software. You get nothing for it. And I think there's this return to that mindset of like, okay, I'm putting money into something, whether it's tech, whether it's people, whatever it may be. I want to pay based on an outcome. I want to see what I'm going to get for that, versus this kind of presumptive investment. And then we're going to integrate it. We're going to run it. And then we're going to start to see yield from that. I think that's another part where, back to the budgets, the conversations we're having, and or I'm having internally, within our operations is, okay, what's the problem it's solving? How are you going to measure the ROI? And how defensible is it? And are we committing in a contract, or can I get out of the contract? Because if it doesn't work, what options do I have?
Mhm.
And this is, I joke all the time with folks that aren't in technology, that the technology is so great. I'm like, you got to remember, as soon as you sell a piece of software, people are unhappy because it doesn't do the thing they don't like.
So true.
Right? As soon as it's done, it's like, versus like the world I live in today, it's like, hey, listen, I'm giving you pipeline. It's there, it's working, it's converting, and that feels great. Like it feels like a very nice exchange of, you trust me, you give me a resource, I give you something back, and we're good. Whereas in software and SaaS in particular, and Jane, I'm sure you've lived this, is you close the big deal and it's almost conditional on certain bits of work. And then maybe you do it, maybe you don't. And then try being the marketing and or the salesperson that has to manage that renewal and or expansion or cross sell. I mean, it's just a tough dynamic, very tough dynamic.
Yeah. The poor CS team. It's true.
I know.
And
It's
I love how
true.
you both touched on too it's interesting because I'm very hungry to hire full time right now, but I very much also love fractional and agencies, especially because, like, for instance, with ABM, ABX campaigns, I very much need somebody who's really skilled at this particular piece, or running linked ads with the B2B mindset and ABX campaign context. Like, you're looking for something very specific. It makes so much sense to bring in fractional on something like that. So yeah, I think it's a good mix, and fractional is very hot right now. So
Well, it also gives you, you can call Brian or me and say, hey, this person did do the job. Like, what's the problem here?
accountability without
Yeah.
putting it yourself. kind of.
I mean, to a certain extent, right? I mean, I do think there is, and it starts with this economic cycle, that maybe the other thing that keeps me up at night is just, there was always pretty simple signals you could listen to say, okay, I should invest right now. Like, hey, I'm returning to growth, profitability. And so you'd look at your market and say, okay, we feel good, let's lean in. But now everything's so interconnected, it's hard to really know, okay, if I'm doing well, to say, like, who else do we need to look at more broadly? And I think from a marketing, leadership perspective, I imagine that's the difficult conversation. It's like, am I ready to commit to a full-time person? Am I ready to commit to that kind of longer term, longer yield thing that I may or may not get a return on? Because I have to, because I've, having come up in sales and entrepreneurship, the CRO and the CMO is always an interesting relationship. And, depending on the cycle, the CRO is either in the hot seat or the CMO is in the hot seat. And I think now more so than ever, there is certainly, everyone's looking to marketing to say, hey, we have discrete resources. How, are we going to get the return? How can we measure it? How can we get the attribution? How can we actually make sure that we're going to get the benefit? Which I think is exciting, actually, but it's challenging.
You know what you just made me realize, Derek, is that in this era, right, where you want to be able to get out of a contract if something's not working for SaaS, right? It's definitely, pilots are huge right now in SaaS, where you want to prove your value before you sign a full, especially before a 3-year contract. Agencies and fractional are kind of your pilot before hiring somebody internally, right? So you get to see how this makes sure this works perfectly. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
And that's exactly a role that we're playing at the moment for a couple of our clients, which is they bought the tech, they haven't got the people internally to run them, they haven't got the expertise to manage the data, but they want to stand up, widespread kind of automated marketing activity. So therefore, they brought us in as the pilot. So they've actually paused headcount. Well, they've used the money that they had in the budget for headcount, brought that forward and put it into us for a 6-month period of time, with a view that we are actively working in that relationship to hand the work over to them when we've made the playbook as to how to do it properly, and that works really well, and there seems to be a lot of businesses out there that are looking for that model.
I love all of that. Fantastic stuff. So when we think about that, let's move to the solution. What does an efficient stack look like today? And Jane, I'll start with you as well. In your mind, what does an efficient outcome-focused go-to-market stack look like? And you don't have to name the technology or anything.
Right. It's like these 5 things. No. Of course, this typical marketing answer, the actual platforms always, it depends. There's an asterisk. But the things I've learned the hard way is there's two things, right? Two ways to think of it. One, we have to really hold back from being excited about new shiny things because there's so many cool toys out there to play with. And I get excited about them and want to bring them in, but you have to pause and really think, will this solve my problems? And so you have to make sure you're starting with the problem. Like where do we have a gap? What is our goal? What solutions fix these problems? What platforms or people or whatever? On the other side, something I've learned the hard way, always look at what you have first and see if you can solve anything with your existing tech stack. Work with depending on the size of your company, your ops person, your sysadmin, whomever. Typically, there's someone who owns a list of all of the platforms, even finance, right? Go to finance and see what you're billing for or what you are billed for. And start looking through that list and see what you can find, especially because right now, SaaS companies are spreading into everything. So a company that used to do just email now does everything, right? So as one example. So there's always tons of different pieces of these platforms you should look into and see if there's elements that could work for you for now as a placeholder.
Yeah, the thing I always think about is open systems. Like I think at the end of the day, if I'm sitting in the marketing chairs, you want that single record of truth to say, here's my account, my contacts, all of the kind of metadata and all the associative, event data from various campaigns or whatever the touch point may be. And you want to be able to have that shared extensively so that you don't have to do hop, skips, and jumps to get to whether it's activation or its subsequent analysis. And then I think the second thing and this is internal, we've done a lot of work in rebalancing labor into different parts of the world. And because there's pools of talent that are incredibly capable and can handle kind of the sun never sets, as well as they have all the right skills. And I think that's something, if you've not worked in a global organization, if you've just worked in one geography, sometimes that doesn't become the first thing you think about. But you can find the skills and or even the tech in many cases that's in a different economy, different economics. And then the thing I love what you said, Jane, about the shiny object. I have been so guilty of like not letting the existing tech stack soak and like make it work and get the rhythm right. Because at the end of the day, it's we're trying to raise awareness, engage people, activate it, hopefully win some business. Like it's not, you don't need to rethink those kind of fundamentals every single time someone comes out with a new shiny toy. But if you've looked at the MarTech map, the subway map, and I want to do a graphic of this from like 2000 to 2025. It was like, it used to look like Upper East Side, New York, or maybe the Tube, Brian, for your benefit. It is, I can't even, there's so many things on it. You can't even read the logos anymore. It's like,
Yeah, and you can't
control.
categorize it anymore because they all do everything.
Yeah, it's like paint by numbers, and a 5-year-old came up and just smeared it all together.
100%. Brian, what about you? Is there any changes that you've made or you've seen to kind of simplify while still driving outcomes?
I think, the key point to kind of get across here is that there isn't right or wrong answers to tech stack or the way that we do marketing. Every campaign, every company's different. So I think for me, the key thing is always around having a plan and a strategy. What is it that we're trying to achieve? What do we want? Ultimately the technology to advance us, and how are we going to get there? But the most important thing from our perspective, certainly being on the agency side, is having a test and learn mentality. You're not going to get it right from day one, but actually everything that you do, you can learn from it, you can refine it, and being able to understand the results, reading the data, being able to then modify your plans going forward, and kind of thinking about it in the context of progress over perfection. You don't have to be perfect. Marketing isn't a perfect science. So really having that adaptable mindset and not overthinking possibly the tech stack, because I've come across a lot of organizations that have, overthought it, and you think, oh, if I just add this piece of the puzzle, then everything's going to work, and it doesn't. And we need to be realistic. We're dealing with humans. Humans don't buy in kind of linear funnels, unfortunately. So we have to have a test and learn mindset in order to accommodate that.
Yeah, love that.
One other thing to think about, I just realized with you two speaking, is think about it when you're bringing in, this is to marketers that are watching this, think about what agencies and fractional you bring in, because they might also come with some tools. For a simple example is my PR agency, right? It wouldn't make sense for us, we're a small marketing team, a smaller company, to bring in PR software to measure our share of voice and everything. They're pretty pricey, and it wouldn't make sense for us to do that. But our PR agency that does a ton more for us does have that kind of software and can share that with us. So always worth looking at that too.
Yeah. Fantastic advice right there. So, we're kind of moving through everything. Let's move to the execution phase of this whole conversation. And Derek, starting with you, how do you see tech-enabled services supporting marketers in executing these campaigns without adding more platform bloat? Because I know, it's funny. I've seen a lot of companies start to use that term bloat in like trying to their product messaging or their taglines or things like that. And I'm curious, like, how have you seen it both internally and even with your customers as well?
Yeah, it's it's an interesting question, because I think internally, just how we run our business, we are always looking for ways to, test and measure. I think, Brian, to your point, without making commitments, and that's for a host of reasons, but probably the headline is things are changing so quickly. I don't want to be in a place where, and not to get super nerdy, but if I'm making a commitment on a database, if it's not open source, what's their release cycle? Like, what are my integrations and APIs? Like, how can I manage the data factory in a way that's not going to kind of pin me to one specific thing? And so if I can partner with someone to help me do either POCs or can do kind of like prototyping, like, I think that mindset translates into all the interactions we have with our clients. I mean, our conversations with, anyone in a marketing leadership role today is we extend and augment and accelerate, not replace and compete, because we ultimately recognize that there's existing investments and there's skills and there's people and there's things that work, like things are working. So and this is one I can't stress enough, is like, start with the data. Is like, how well do you really understand your source systems and its quality? And how do how well do you understand your ICP and segmentation and cohorts and purchasing? And I just think now more so than ever, like, we see a world where everything is personalized. I think we collect it, not DemandScience. I think we see everyone I talk to is a world where you're getting signals. So everything should get ever more so personalized. And that starts with data. And I think that's where we can help. And I think that model can help, because you have a lot of data inside your building you're probably not even tapping into. Not because you don't necessarily understand it per se, but rather you may have locked into systems, or you don't have the skills, or you don't necessarily have the budget. And if you can do a spot project, or you can do something to test it without a ton of commitment, that's a really attractive way to get started. And I'd say the other thing is, there's this big long debate about what's the future of the internet, like what will happen to a web browser, what will happen to, a digital discovery process if LLMs that become ever more specialized replace the need to go to a URL. Because if you can get to an LLM that does all of the discovery work and the qualification and the kind of the framing, why do I need to go do that? That being, I think, years out. But I think the innovation that's happening around data and specialized LLMs, which we spend a lot of time in to help our clients process and then even present data differently to their prospects and customers, that's a risky proposition if you've got a discrete budget and you don't necessarily know or have all the answers. Where, we get the benefit of being able to kind of concentrate a lot of smart folks with a lot of data and a lot of insights that, you can experiment with. And I think that's a really cool way to show up and be a partner to your customer versus, and this is back to software, sell and then move on to the next. Like, we kind of live and die. And I think tech-enabled services, Brian, the same way, you live by the work you do, and you got to show up every single day and deliver outcomes. And I think that's what every organization needs today. It's a weird economy right now. But that's going to talk a lot about internal.
I completely agree, and it's not just delivering outcomes to fulfill the work that you've got today, but that's where your new work's going to come from, because it's a lot easier to get work from referrals than it is to go to cold new logos. So yeah, everything's about the results, everything's about the integrity of what you say and what you deliver.
100%. Couldn't have said it better myself. Now, Jane, going to you, when you think about multi-channel campaigns, and I think it kind of goes to a little bit of what Brian and Derek talked about, but how can marketers run these multi-channel campaigns today without adding more tools? I mean, again, I guess it goes back to the overall theme, doing more with less, a little bit more. But from your experience, what have you seen to be effective today?
I think especially if we're talking to enterprise and sales-led growth companies in B2B, then it's all coming down to relationships now. And I know this sounds like a broken record of quality over quantity, but it's so much more in that vein now. I wish everybody understood this, though, but with all of the noise that AI is creating, we're getting a lot of junk everywhere, and even more just thrown at us all the time. So taking a step back and making sure that at the end of the day, back to basics, what you're creating, what you're providing to your audience, your prospects, your customers adds value. It helps them in some way. Because the same as what Brian just said, right? It brings referrals. That same, no matter what you're selling, SaaS, services, whichever, you want to make sure that you're making an impact, you're creating that relationship, and it automatically will lead to more. It's a flywheel once you start that. So if you think of that, whichever channels you're going on, it'll work. But I would also say focus. This is going to be my word of H2, is really pinpointing, especially smaller teams, consolidated tech stack. You don't have to be everywhere all at once. If you're everywhere all at once, it's kind of like you're nowhere. You want to do a few different channels really, really well. I'm saying this out loud, so it's a reminder to myself as well.
I would like 10x that statement. Again, this is for us at DemandScience. We can go sell and market to the world, right? But if we are really smart, which I'd like to think we are, we can focus on specific industries and industry subsegments and personas, and like where I know problems exist and we can solve them. I think the challenge for marketing, and even sales and marketing, commercial organizations, is the perception that if, it's FOMO almost. Like, well, if I'm not everywhere, then I'm nowhere. And even if you say, even if you're concentrating the enterprise segment, like we have worked with a company that sells, offers essentially Salesforce, but very specialized industries like accounting, legal, and finance. They know every law firm. Like they know every single law firm. So there's a very discrete box. And so their challenge is, how are they sure that when someone's in a buying cycle, like really in a buying cycle, and whether you believe it's 3% or 7% of your respective market, like how do you show up and make sure you show up, but make sure that you don't spend a fortune showing up at that moment like that. But that paradigm of own your market and your message and your focus, that's, I think, what then forces a ton of discipline about your tactics and managing those tactics and orchestrating them. Like we spend a lot of time, how do you get ever more personalized so that as your signals are collected, you can shift from, hey, let's get them to a live event, or let's corral them into a digital event, or let's, give them a call to action that is really about the pilot, like get them to pilot. I think that's the tricky bit, that, automating that orchestration that's I think both art and science with how to focus.
And I think it's a different podcast or webinar session, but creativity and the role of creativity plays. What we're seeing with AI is there's this convergence where everything's going to look and sound the same, because that's the way that AI is trained, and that's what it's going to do, and it's going to do it at such a scale that everyone's just going to blank it out, and therefore creativity then becomes much more of a differentiator, and that's what's going to potentially get you through the door. So I say, much bigger topic, lots of people talking about it in the industry right now, but it's definitely something to consider for the future.
I always think about what happened to American radio. Like if you listen to American radio in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s, dialects, music, advertising. Now you go to radio, and it's all the same. The DJs all sound the same. The music's all the same. And that's the risk we run, is that, I think, Brian, it's a great point, is like, how do you, not fall down to the lowest common denominator? Like, how do you still protect creativity, authenticity, and like engagement, so that it makes sense to the prospect or the customer?
Yeah, but just to summarize, I think Jane nailed it as well. Everything that she said, I completely agree with, but I just layer creativity over the top of it.
100%. So
Comes back to brand, right? We talked about
Back
this in
to
a
brand.
prep session, but brand is going to have its day again, thankfully. All hail brand, because brand and demand go hand in hand. Way too rhymey, but it works.
I know, but it's true. But it's true.
all right. So I've got one final question for you, and I want to see if we can. This is going to be a little fun, but I want to see if we can do this in one sentence. So I want you to give, and Jane, I'll start with you, but give any final advice to marketers that are trying to simplify their tech stack today while still driving pipeline. But see if you can do it in one sentence. I've done this before. And it's actually very, very challenging. So if you can do it, big applause.
I'll try. Sometimes it sucks to go first. Sometimes it's better. We'll see which way this goes. I think that at the end of the day, come back to their own business, where your problem is, and also then, most importantly, for your audience. Start with that message, be where your audience is, and go from there. So start simple and scale.
Love that. Brian, I'll let you go next.
Yeah, again, completely agree with Jane. I think the only thing that I think you referenced it earlier, Jane, is around finding the value. You've got to find the value, and you need to present the value, and you need to keep presenting the value, and then think about that in that test and learn mindset. How can you keep demonstrating it in a way that's slightly different, keep testing different ways of talking about value? But if you're not talking about value, you're not going to win.
100%. Derek, how about you? Bring us home.
Yeah, no, I echo the same sentiments. And this is going to sound very cliched, but focus on the data and keep it simple.
Yep.
That's where most of the truth lies, and everything else, bears out.
100%. Well, this was fantastic. First off, thank you all for joining us today. I want to kind of share a few key takeaways from our discussion that I think was impactful for sure. The most efficient stacks start with clarity on outcomes, not the latest tools. It was something I was taught very early on in my career. I think it still holds true today, even more so than ever. I think the second thing is you can do a lot more with what you already have when you focus on people and process. And the third thing is tech and services working together is how lean teams can move fast without overloading. And I think, obviously there's so much more, all of our guests today shared so many fantastic pieces, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of pressure on marketers right now. If you're feeling overwhelmed, you're not alone. Trust me. If you've listened to this and you've made it this far, you are not alone. We hope this conversation helps spark some ideas, give you a sense of direction. Thank you to Jane. Thank you to Brian. Thank you to Derek for sharing your thoughts. And as next steps, I encourage everyone to connect with all three of them on LinkedIn. And that's it. Thanks again. We'll see you at the next webinar, and reach out if you have any questions.